You have to remove the structural dependence on lands to your east. If you're looking for a way to free up options, which in a world that's changing, options are the best thing you can do, you need to make sure that your economic structure is not dependent on the reassertion of some pre-war environment, because that's not coming back. And even if it did, all that would do is put you back in the same position you're in. So that means largely removing natural gas from your fuel mix. Now, some people in Germany think you should do that for environmental reasons. I'm saying it's for security reasons, because right now you're dependent upon supplies from a hemisphere away, which is equally dangerous. That also means you need to turn your nuclear power plants back on. And that also means that your green community needs to make their peace with coal being your number one source of fuel for at least the next 20 years. Now, I would argue that the Green Party in Germany has already made their peace with coal. German carbon emissions, because of a lot of decisions you've made, are through the roof. They're going to stay high for decades. There's no way around that. Nuclear power plants are one of the few ways that you might be able to deal with that moving forward. But that also means that Germany's role as a major chemicals processor and producer is also over. Germans do high-end, precision-driven manufacturing. That is somewhat energy intensive. But if you remove the chemicals component, it's significantly less. Now that means you have to have an extra European partner. And the United States is the best short-term option there. I don't know if that's politically viable in Germany, but that is the least disruptive way for Germany to get some strategic flexibility. If you had asked me in January of 2021, I would have laughed. But you've already gone a long way, and honestly, you probably have the best possible governing coalition for this strategic situation, because the Social Democrats were traditionally the pro-Russia party. The Greens were never good at math. And the FDP is primarily concerned with smaller companies. And to have these three parties having to make these decisions means that there's no protest from within the parliament. That is a rare constellation of events that normally don't shape up in a time of national stress. To have the parties that are most resistant to the future you're obviously barreling towards in charge of bringing you into that future. If Ukraine wins, and it does so by neutralizing Belgorod and Rostov-on-Don, we're at the beginning of the Russian disintegration. Most of the infrastructure that allows the Russian core around Moscow to influence the Northern Caucasus, pre-Soviet, it routed through Ukraine. And the only other reliable route goes through Rostov-on-Don. And if they lose that, they are almost let me put this into European terms. There's a Utah-sized desert between the two. So that's bigger than Austria, about twice the size of Austria. No, three times the size of Austria. Crap, yeah, that's huge. And so their ability to protect, their ability to dictate the security environment of the Northern Caucasus would evaporate. And yes, we do have Kadyrov, who's that megalomaniac, psychopath, who runs Chechen forces today. But he does that because he has a security agreement with Putin personally.
Yeah.
If the Russian forces cannot penetrate into the North Caucasus, that'll evaporate in a day. And now all of a sudden the Russians have lost the entirety of their southern anchor. Once that goes down, every other minority in the Russian Federation is going to look good and hard on their map and good and hard at the Kremlin and figure out how much wiggle room they have. And some of those minorities have a lot more influence and are in positions that are very sensitive to the Russian state. For example, if the Tatars or the Bashkirs broke away, that would be it. Moscow would lose control of the entirety of Siberia, complete with all of the oil. So we really are looking at Russia's twilight years if this war goes the wrong way for them. The war was going to happen anyway. And if all of the states of the former Soviet bloc had remained neutral, that just meant it would have happened sooner. If they lose, the entire Russian government is in danger. The problem here is honestly the same no matter how this goes down. There was a coup in the Soviet Union in 1982 in which the intelligence directorates took over the Communist Party and ran the country until it fell apart. And then that cadre survived into the post-Cold War era, and Putin is the heir to that legacy. Also, in about 1986, the technical educational system in the Soviet Union fell apart and was never reconstituted, and it wasn't reconstituted in post-Soviet Russia either. So the entirety of the leadership cadre of today's Russian Federation is heir to those two problems. And it's only about 130 people. And they all see the world the same way. And Putin has purged it pretty much of anyone who might theoretically throw a coup. So, assuming for the moment that Putin were to die tomorrow, I don't think it would really matter for the war or the overall strategic aims. All of the people who are left in leadership see the world through more or less the same lens. Now, there would be probably a 3 to 6 month period where the remaining 130 people decide, who's going to be in charge, and that would be some valuable disruption time if you're Ukraine. But I don't think it fundamentally moves the needle. If Russia wins, well, honestly, that's a question for Berlin. Because what would probably happen is the Russians would get to the border of Warsaw and they would call up Stockholm and Berlin and Paris and London on a conference call and say, look, we know we can't match you on the field of battle. So we've already given the order. The nukes will launch tomorrow at noon. You have until then to forswear all defensive relationships with the Poles. They are not interested, except for maybe in buying time a little bit. Let me hit that in 3 pieces. First, and most importantly, I have no information that points fingers at anyone. So I personally do not know, and I do not know anyone who knows. And I've even been to Langley in the last few months, and they don't know.
Oh, okay.
Officially anyway. So there's that. Number 2, the 2 dominant theories don't make much sense to me. So the first dominant theory, of course, is that the Russians did it to their own pipeline, but this was Russia's primary method of manipulating Germany, which they've done so effectively for so long, so that doesn't really hold water for me. The second theory is that the United States did it in order to make sure that the Europeans had no choice but to stand against the Russians. And I could have entertained that as of August 31st of last year. But on September 1, the Kremlin ordered Nord Stream shut down and publicly delivered an ultimatum to Berlin, basically saying, look, without this, you will deindustrialize and your entire economic model will fail. Or you can stab Ukraine in the back and pull out of the coalition supplying Ukraine, in which case we will turn it back on. You have to choose between being Western or modern. And the Americans were getting the hammer ready because from the last 30 years of German behavior, we thought we knew what the Germans were going to do. We thought they were going to side with the Russians again. And then they didn't. Germany chose